Hi guys, Ross here and welcome back to another video. So this has been a long requested video series that I'm going to be doing, and I'm going to be going through how to take your piece of lettering, vectorize it, take it over to After Effects and then turn that into an animation. Now this is going to be based off a video I've previously done on how to animate your hand lettering, but I feel like I've learned a lot more since making that video and I can teach it a lot better. So this is actually going to be a collaboration with someone called Rafa McGow. I'll probably put a link to their Instagram on the video somewhere or in the description. And we're going to be working with a piece of hand lettering that they have made, and I'm going to take it, vectorize it, and then animate it. At the moment, there will probably be some animations going through on the screen, so you can kind of get an idea of what this is going to look like. And let's get straight into it. So I have been provided with a PSD of his hand lettering. I advise you to get yours ready into Photoshop, or if you've made an Illustrator, etc., just get it ready. And so this is what we're going to be working with. We're going to be working with tropical heat lettering, and it looks really good. And I'm really excited to see what we can come up with. So I'm just going to drag this over into Photoshop. So I'm just trying to find the layer. There we go. I'm going to drag this over into Illustrator. So if I just open up Illustrator quickly and go to create new, you're going to want to create your document at the size that you want the animation to be. Now this is because when you import it into After Effects, it is going to import the Adobe Illustrator file in at the same proportion. So if you have a different composition size in After Effects, and we'll go over compositions later, you are going to get it out of proportion and out of position. So it's best to kind of set the size that you're going to be using later on for the animation. I'm going to be using 1080 by 1080 because that is the size that I upload my artwork to Instagram. So I've just got it set to 1080 pixels. Let me just change that quickly. 1080 pixels by 1080 pixels. Leave all the other settings the same, that's fine, and we're just going to hit create. So as I said, I'm just going to go back to Photoshop quickly and literally just drag and drop it into Illustrator. Let's see if that works for me. Sometimes it doesn't. There we go, come on, there we go, perfect. So we have our piece of lettering, and I'm just going to work on centering this. Let's see where it says, there we go. Right, perfect. So as you can see, we have one layer on the right hand side right now, and I'm just going to select this by pressing the circle icon, coming up to the lines in the top right above it, and just hitting template. Now what that is going to do is lock the layer, and as well as that, it's going to fade and reduce the opacity so it's easier to draw over the top of. So the next step is to create a new layer, which we can do by pressing the create new layer icon in the bottom right of the layers panel. By the way, if you don't have the layers panel up, you can go to window and make sure you've got layers ticked. So we're going to make a new layer. So I'm going to start off with the T, so Command plus and Command minus to zoom in and out. And there's one very important thing you want to do when you're vectoring your hand lettering. So I'm going to press P for the pen tool, and we're going to be using a technique which involves using only horizontal, vertical and some diagonal anchor points and handles. So the best way to do this is find the extreme points and ends of each letter form. So for example, working on the stem of this T, I'm going to go to the top middle and I'm going to click and hold. And this is going to allow us to create handles and create Bezier paths. And if we hold shift, that is going to snap it to horizontal, 45-degree and vertical angles. So what we're going to want to do for this one is create a horizontal anchor point. So I'm just going to drag it out a little bit. And you can see if I just move now, so I'm going to click, let me just go through that again. I'm going to click and drag whilst holding shift to create that horizontal path, and if I then let go, that's going to create our first point, and we can start to move around and you can see how that curve is going to affect the path. So if I then go down to the bottom left where I think the next extreme point would be, I'm going to click and drag again whilst holding shift, and I'm just going to drag to the left, which you can then see is bending our path. So I'm just going to drag and drop it there, and I'm just going to make sure that I've got this selected as a stroke so I can come up to our toolbar on the left hand side, and again if this isn't showing you can go to window, tools, default, just make sure you've got tools selected. Yeah, okay, so come down to tools and make sure you've got default selected. So we're going to come down to the bottom of the toolbar, and you see this white icon that's on the foreground, that is the fill, and the background is the stroke. So if I just press that arrow to swap them, and we now have a white stroke, but that's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to change it to a black one by double clicking on the white and just changing that color to black. So you can now see we've got a stroke, and we can see easier what the letter form is looking like. So I'm going to come up to the first point, and if I hold Alt, that is going to allow me to alter the handles. Now, whilst holding Alt and Shift, I'm going to click on this handle. It should come up and it should snap to it, and we can just drag this out. I'm going to come back down to the bottom one, and I'm going to drag this in. So you can see we're starting to get that shape, and of course it's not exactly the same. This is something we can come back on afterwards and work on. So if I then go back to our latest anchor points, that's the one in the bottom left, and click and drag again, that's just going to reselect it, and we can drag out the handle. And for this, I'm only going to want to drag a tiny handle because it's quite a sharp curve. And I'm then going to come up to the top of that, hold Shift, drag out, and let me just zoom in so you can see that a bit better. And I'm going to hold Alt, come back down to our middle anchor point at the bottom, and just drag the handle out a bit more whilst holding Shift again, and we can start to refine those paths. So the first time round when you make this, I'm doing it slowly now just to show you the process, but you'll kind of pick it up and you'll go through the first one quickly, and then you can come back and just refine everything afterwards. So on the left, I'm then going to click and drag and make a vertical anchor point. I'm then going to come down to the bottom where it looks like it's flattish, and just click and drag, and there you go. We're going to start working on these points. You can go back, so again holding Alt to adjust our previous anchor points and handles, and we can start to alter these. So I'm going to finish this up. This one here, I believe, could be a diagonal anchor point. So I'm going to make one here, hold Shift, and kind of draw a diagonal shape, come back to the bottom and just drag this handle out. Yeah, I believe this is, so there we go. So that'd be an example of a diagonal one where you kind of need to add an anchor point like halfway up that angled slope. Then we're going to come up to the top right, click and drag whilst holding Shift, make a vertical one, and this you can see where the handles start to overlap. So we're going to come back to this one, holding Shift, and just drag it down a bit, probably not too much, and then bring this up a bit. We might actually make this a horizontal anchor point, so I'm just going to adjust that quickly, just to move those. So they're very small handles, these ones, and then we're just going to rejoin it with the last one, clicking and dragging, and there we go. So at the moment you can see it's quite a rough letter form, and we are just going to adjust this top one here a bit. So I think the best way to go about this is actually, let's see if we can get rid of this diagonal one, because sometimes they can actually mess the flow up. So I'm just going to get rid of that one, drag the top one out. Yeah, and there we go, we didn't actually need that one. So it's good to show these things though, just in case. So that actually looks a lot smoother now. And I'm just going to drag this out a tiny bit, move that into the middle a bit, there we go, and just zoom out, drag that out. So this is all just kind of trial and error until you get something which is looking smooth, and that is kind of a big priority, is making sure that you have smooth paths. Otherwise you'll kind of get these jagged edges and it will make it look a lot more unprofessional. So this one I'm tempted to try, nope, alright, let's not try that. So I'm going to kind of go through this process, and I might speed this up. If there's anything which I feel is valuable and that I can teach you along the way, then I'll slow it down and I will let you know about that. So I'm just going to go through this quickly and we'll see what we pick up. So obviously when you do hand letter things, I'm not sure if this was made digitally. It looks like it was made on an iPad Pro, because I can kind of tell because I've seen this texture a lot. But when it's hand lettered, obviously you don't have these techniques of making the vertical and horizontal anchor points. So when it does come to vectorizing it, like that first one, you will see kind of how different it is. But this is sometimes for the best, because this is how it would actually work. And this is also a very important bit. So we have come to the R now, and this is especially important for when you come to vectorizing your hand lettering. Now, any overlapping paths, when it comes to animating it, basically you can't have any overlapping paths, because then when you animate it, it's not going to give it a smooth look. It's kind of hard to explain, I did roughly go over it in my first video, but essentially we're just going to go through, and when we get to any overlapping parts like this, I'm just going to create a new path. So I'm just trying to figure out how. Right, so the way I'm going to do this one is if I just undo it quickly, and I'm going to actually drag this right to the top here, the middle, and I'm then going to drag the top handle down and make it a horizontal one, and then I'm going to start working my way down like this. Just start doing it like this till we get to the end here, and we'll just join this up. And of course guys, if you know there's some bits you don't understand, the comments section is a great place to put your questions, and I will try my best to answer them to the best of my abilities. If I can't answer it, then you've got a whole community around you which hopefully someone will know the answer to. So for this one, I've actually made a single path going all the way to the top, and I'm then going to make a separate path which kind of goes around to the left and back down and up. So I'm going to join it up there. It will snap to a previous anchor you've already made. So I'm going to click there, and make sure you don't already have the anchor selected, because if I've got it selected and I click, that's going to actually take away that anchor point. So make sure you've got it unselected, deselected, and just click there and drag, and we can continue with making this piece. So again, just dragging these handles out, holding shift to make sure they're vertical or horizontal or diagonal, and we can continue to build up this letter form. Now if it's taken you a while, do not worry. Obviously I've been vectoring a lot of hand lettering pieces over my time. I made that sound like I've done it for ages, I really haven't, but it is simple enough once you start doing it, especially if you're doing it frequently. What I'd say is a great way to practice is actually to find hand lettering pieces online. I'm happy if you go onto my page and you take some of my pieces. Obviously just for practice, don't start posting it anywhere, but find pieces of hand lettering and just practice vectorizing them. Obviously they're other people's artwork, so don't put them anywhere like I just said, but they're great just to practice in Illustrator with, and you'll kind of get used to building up that way of tackling different pieces of hand lettering, especially with different styles, because you'll approach it differently. So I'm just going to join up this last bit here, and you'll come across loads of different ways you can attempt things, especially with different styles like I just said, because especially with different letter forms like this R for example, it is really hard to kind of figure out the best place to put your anchor points, because like I said, you need to put them in extreme points, because basically the less anchor points you've got, the smoother the path is going to be. Right, so as you can see from this R that I've just done, I've split it into two paths, because as I said, when you come to animate it, let me just kind of move with my mouse how this would work. So it's going to start from the bottom, flow up, and then when we got to this area here, it would then have to loop back around and come down, and that would be an overlapping area. And the way we animate it, it would reveal that overlapping area before we wanted to. So by creating two separate paths, this one would go straight up from the bottom up to the top, and then this next path would start here, which would then come around, down and back up again. So yeah, essentially any overlapping areas you kind of want to eliminate, which can mean you split it into two separate paths, which can be annoying, but sometimes it has to be done. And if you're dealing with a vectorized piece that's already been vectorized for you and you just want to animate it, which is what happens with me a lot, because I happen to animate a lot of people's logos or logo types they've already made, I would actually have to go through and I would split up the layers, which I think I'll show you now for this O, because it's probably going to be easier than trying to do it in two separate paths. So if I just start there, and I'm going to make a diagonal point here, because you can kind of see it's got a sharp edge. So I'm going to make a diagonal point there. And with O's, I always try to do just the top and bottom, but sometimes that doesn't work. So let me just try and see if I can get it with this one. Yeah, that worked fairly well. And I'm just going to then drag that up to where I think the diagonal line would work. Let's see. No, I'm going to have to do one halfway up here. So let's try that. O's are probably the hardest, because obviously trying to get a smooth O is quite hard, because of just its rounded shape. So I'm just trying to work on this quickly. And if you hold Alt and click on an anchor point, that will actually delete a handle. So as you can see, this is curved, but if I press that, that is actually going to get rid of it. I don't actually want that, but it's just a great technique. So what I'm actually going to do is hold Alt, but as opposed to that, if you hold Alt, click and drag, you can then drag out a handle. So I'm going to create a smaller one there and just start dragging our handles down. And it's a great thing to do is to actually try and make your anchors parallel with each other. So I'm just going to finish this O and then I can explain to you what I mean. So let me just close that up. So for example, I've got an anchor point at the bottom of very bottom of this O here, and then there's one directly above it there. Another example would be on the right hand side, I got one there and then one to the right of it. I'm actually just going to adjust that to make them parallel. And this is a great way to kind of create an even composition within your letterforms. So I'm just smoothing this O out. As you can see, it's a tiny bit hard to get those smooth edges. So there we go. So another thing when it comes to animations is we use something called a stroke effect. Now what this does is actually fills your letterform with a stroke. So for example, this one's overlapping. So if I started here, the letterform, you use a brush size to fill the width of that path, and if the brush is too big, obviously it's going to start moving into other parts of the letter. So if we started at the top of the O here and we went down, because this is a really thick part, we'd have to use a large brush, and that would then probably transfer over to this thin part of the O, and that's why we have to split it into two. So a great way to do this is by using something called the knife tool. So I'm just going to select my O, come over to our eraser, and we're going to left click and hold and grab the knife tool. Now I'm going to zoom in by pressing Command plus, and what I find is is the best way to go around this is to split the letterform evenly. Then when you create your animation, you'll be able to animate it smoothly and it won't be too fast one-sided to the other. So what I find with O's is the best way to go about it is to split it right down the middle where these 2 points are here. So I've got it selected, I've got the knife tool, and I'm literally going to click and drag as if I was cutting it with a knife. So if you look at this now, you can see it split it into 2 different points, or 2 different parts, sorry. Now, what you're going to do, and if I just change this from a stroke to a fill, it's kind of hard to visualize in Illustrator, but when you take it into Photoshop, there will be a tiny little white line where these 2 paths are, because they're not actually overlapping each other. So what you actually need to do now is click on one of them. So if I double click on this, it goes into isolation mode. This means I can only edit this one layer and I can't edit anything else. Now we're going to click on these anchor points, and with the handles, I'm just going to press A, to get the direct selection tool, which will allow me to select the one anchor point. And I'm going to grab the handle, again hold shift to make it vertical, and we're just going to drag these and just overlap it a bit. So this will just make sure that they've definitely overlapped and we don't get those white lines like I talked about. So I'm just going to overlap both so they're overlapping each other, and that is perfect. Now another thing is obviously up here, we've now got this tiny bit, hold on, let me just sort that around. We've got this bit here which has now been cut off from this bit. So this right hand side bit has taken our little curved end from the start of the O. Now I think the best way to tackle this is to actually select both of them, and we're going to use something called the shape builder tool. So we're going to come over, grab the shape builder tool, and this essentially allows you to, it's in the name, build shapes. So we're going to click and drag, and that's going to merge them two together. So we now have this shape here, which is the left hand side, and then we have this shape here, which is the right hand side. So again, because we use that shape builder tool and we use the knife to cut it, our right hand side has got this little cutout in it. Now we're going to want to get rid of this, so I'm just going to press the minus tool, the minus key on my keyboard to get the pen tool with the minus, and we're going to click that, and that's just going to get rid of that. We're then going to drag these handles, and you kind of just want to get them to line up with the handles on the other side just to make a smooth path. And there we go. Now that's not going to matter too much, because if you think about how this is going to be animated, or let me just swap it back to a fill and you'll understand. is that little bit is actually covered up. So even if it's not the smoothest path there between those two anchor points, it's going to be covered by this little curve at the end here. So that's fine. And I'm sorry if this is a bit too much to take in. I completely understand if it is. Sometimes you'll get these little paths which are left over from where you've cut it with a knife. You can just select these and delete them, it's fine. You'll kind of notice these when you go back through the layers at the end, so just don't worry about it too much. So there we go, that's one layer there, one layer there. And this is the great thing about vectoring it from scratch, is you can kind of do this as you go along, whereas when I've got a vector pre-made, or sorry, when I've got Animate pre-made vectors, I've got to go through and completely split all the letters up, and it just takes me just as long. I may as well just vector it from the beginning. So I hope all of this makes sense. If it doesn't, just kind of go back through the video and just re-listen to it, re-watch it, and hopefully you'll understand. But I'm going to go through it a few more times and hopefully it will make perfect sense to you guys. So another example of when we would have to do this is for this long P. So I'm just going to quickly vectorize it. I might speed this bit up, I might not, it depends again if there's any valuable content. This is a very good bit here for me to mention, which I'm not sure if I have already, but if you hold Alt and here, if I just undo that, you can see it kind of goes from a rounded bit here. So I'd use a horizontal and a vertical anchor point, but then it's a sharp change in angle. So we would hold Alt and we would change the handle to a vertical one there, which then allows us to go straight down, just like the drawing. So let me just start that from the beginning. So for example here, you would want to make this a separate object. So most people would continue going up with a P here. I recommend just making the stem one path and then making the rest of the P a separate one. There we go. So here's an example of where we would have to cut this shape up. Now, this is a good example of where we can use the shape builder tool. So I'm going to swap this to a fill, just because I find it easier to work with a fill, and I'm going to select it, get the knife tool, and the way we want to split this is make that this long swoop going vertically down one path, and then when it gets to the bottom where it kind of has this, let me zoom in on it, this little point bit here where it goes in and back out, that's going to be where we cut it. So I'm going to make a knife there. Let me just zoom in and make that a bit smoother. So make that knife point there, and we're actually going to use the shape builder tool now. So as you can see, we've already managed to cut this up just by making that one point. So we've got a shape here, a shape here, and a shape here. So we can select all these by holding shift. So select the first one, hold shift, select the second one, hold shift, select that, and then we're going to use the shape builder tool. So that's just here on the toolbar, and we can click and drag, and that's going to merge them all into one. So we then have one path there, we have another path here, and then we have a path here. Now we can combine these two paths, and the way you have to actually do that, as far as I'm aware, is drag the anchor points so they meet each other, and then use the shape builder tool to connect them. Because if we do it now, you can see like they're not connected. You can see I just went over them. I clicked, dragged, clicked the other one, but because they're not actually attached to each other, not touching each other, they're still going to remain separate objects. So the best way to do this, because obviously if I drag this anchor point here, drag it over, that's going to affect the whole letter form, is to just get your pencil and just let's go into isolation mode and make this easier. Press the plus on your keyboard, and we're just going to make a path right above that original one, and then make another path right below this one at the top, and we're just going to drag these out. They don't have to be smooth or precise, just as long as they kind of meet the other one. So I'm going to, it would snap to the other anchor point, so you can do that. And now if we select that and select the other one and use the shape builder tool, click and drag, that's going to turn into one. And this is when you can now start to try smoothing them out, start work on smoothing them out. So I'm going to get the minus button on the keyboard and just kind of get rid of that anchor point there. and work on adjusting this handle here, which I notice has kind of got out of control, so I'm just going to drag them in to the anchor point. I think that's actually a double up of anchor points there, so I'm just going to zoom in and inspect that. Let's see, yeah, there's actually 2 there, so if I minus that one there and move that back to there, and if we got the same here, nope, that's fine, that's 1 anchor point. And we can start to play with these handles to get a smooth path. So I'm going to go to isolation mode again, just so I don't keep selecting the other one by accident. So sometimes I have really small handles, so it's actually hard to find them. But again, like I mentioned earlier, you get the pen tool, hold Alt, and you can drag them out. Now it's going to drag both sides, so the best way to go about this is zoom out, hold Alt and drag, and it will keep the existing path until you let go, then it updates it. So if you hold Alt and drag and just try match it up with how it originally looked, so we just play with that, and there you go, that looks perfect. And now if we just press A, we can adjust get the pen tool, hold Alt, and we can adjust the one side of the handle. So I can start to play with this now. And there we go. Now, you don't really have to go through all that technically, because if you think how this is going to animate, the stem's going to come down and then it's going to loop around here. So that section that we just edited actually isn't going to be shown. So it doesn't matter how smooth it is really, but I'm going to zoom in now and I'm going to go through and overlap these 2 points like I mentioned earlier. So just drag the handles out and just drag that out, and then do it for the other side. And there we go. So that's just going to make sure that there isn't a thin white line when you put them into After Effects. So I think I've kind of covered everything for how you vectorize this. So I'm just going to go through. I'm definitely going to speed up this bit, and I will see you on the other side. So A's are another letter which are a great example of when you'd have to use the knife tool. So I'm just going to start off by swapping this over to a fill, and I'm going to use the pathfinder tool quickly. So if you don't have the pathfinder tool, you can go up to Window, Pathfinder, make sure you have that selected, and we're just going to press 1 in from the left called minus front. So that's going to cut a shape out of another shape. So now we have this A letter form, and we're going to use the knife tool to cut it. So I've got to imagine where I actually want it to start, so I probably have it start around about here. So I'm going to cut it through there, and that's still one shape because obviously there's not another cut to separate it. So I'm probably going to separate it right at the bottom here. So I'm going to get the knife tool again and just cut through it. And now if we look, we have one shape here and then we have another shape here. So I'm just going to go into here and just make sure we have that overlap I was talking about earlier. Just going to drag the anchor points, and sometimes it will actually snap to a nearby path. So as you can see, mine is snapping to this path right below it, so that's going to make it smooth for us. And I'm just going to get the other path and I'm going to drag the anchor points up, so not the anchor points, the handles, and come on to the bottom and just make sure that these are overlapped. So just do that. And you've also got to think for the A one. So let me just, there we go, that's perfect. You got to think how it would start as well. So let me just isolate this. So when it starts animating, it's going to start at this end. So you don't want to do a botched job of rounding these off, because if I just kind of did something like that, that's not going to look great when it starts animating it. So you do kind of want it to have a smooth edge to these. So what I've actually had to do just there is create some points which don't follow that horizontal and vertical rule. So if I just kind of undo it a bit, and I can show you where the problem was. So with this one, I had created, like I have been doing for the rest of them, a horizontal point here and a vertical one here. Now the problem with this is it kind of followed this line how I wanted. Obviously it wasn't perfect, but then when you get down to this bit here, you can see no matter like what I did, it wasn't very smooth. So what I did was actually get rid of this first horizontal point here and drag the handle out from this far point over here and kind of match that up. So we've got a super smooth line, but it's not having this gap in this area here. So I just create an anchor point where I think it needs to be lower down. So I'm just going to press plus, click that, and that's going to set a handle for you already because it's going to follow the curve. And we're literally just going to click that new anchor point we made and drag it down, and then go back to the original anchor on the far right and just drag this handle in. And as you can see, that has actually solved our problem. So here's another example of where we can use the knife tool and the shape builder. So I'm going to go over this because I feel like this is quite a complex operation if you haven't done it before. So for this one, I'm going to want to split it in half at the top of the E. So I'm going to make a knife and just cut that there, and then that has split that into two. So if I select that, we have this one piece and then we have this piece, but what we actually want is this piece and this little kind of curve indent bit here as well. So I'm going to select both of them, get the shape builder tool, and we're going to click and drag on this and then over the other curve shape. So that's turned that into one shape, and then we also have the second shape, but that now has the curve taken out of it. So I'm going to press the minus on the keyboard and just take away these anchor points we don't need here. So there we go, and then just readjust these handles. So let me just make sure I've got it selected. I'm going to go into the isolation mode by double clicking it, which will make it easier. I'm just going to click and drag and match these handles up to the path. And like I mentioned earlier, this hasn't got to be perfect, because if we swap this over to a fill instead of a stroke, that's actually going to be covered up by that curve. So between those two anchor points there, these two, it hasn't got to be perfect. So don't worry too much about that. Right, so I think we have finished vectorizing this. This is going to be the first part of our video towards animating our lettering. I hope everything has made sense in this video. If not, drop a comment in the comment section down below and we can try help each other out. And I hope to catch you in part 2 of this series. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will catch you in the next video. Peace.